The river is a powerful and far-falling river, constant in its course, and its bed of limestone and tough clay is in general a good bed for big dams. He is a mountaineer. His forefathers settled this country in the 1700s when the effete civilization east of the Alleghenies stuck in their craws. They kept much to themselves, and their great-grandsons do likewise, and live in much the same way. While slowly the sawmills, and the mines, and the railways, and the highways, and now TVA, burn seclusion from about them. Such is the laboratory for a great experiment. Such are the raw materials, good and ill, from which TVA prepares to fashion a civilization which, in a certain important way, is new and is significant to all the U.S. James Agee, Fortune Magazine.
This is Norris Dam. 80 years after it began operations in 1936, it would be hard to overstate how this structure and the power it generated forever altered the people, the character, and the nature of East Tennessee, and in truth, the entire country. Hello, I'm Robin Wilhoit.
And I'm John Becker. Today, for better or worse, our civilization and culture simply could not function without electrical power. Just 80 years ago, within the living memory of many people, electrical power was practically unknown in rural Tennessee. In the entire state, about 2% of rural inhabitants had access to it. Norris Dam and the TVA dams after it would change all of that. But that change did not come without sacrifice. By sheer numbers, more families would have their lives disrupted by the construction of Norris Dam than the number of families touched by the attack at Pearl Harbor or in the Twin Towers on September 11th.
About 3,000 families, an estimated 14,000 people and homesteads would have to leave their homes forever.
And yet many did so willingly, or at least with a high sense of purpose.
When last they turned their back on their homes, they all agreed it was indeed for the greater good.
The founding producer of the Heartland series, in partnership with 10 News, presents For the Greater Good, Norris Dam at 80.
Norris Dam and the town of Norris, located about 20 miles north of Knoxville, were named for Senator George Norris.
So, who was George Norris, and what did he do to get his name on a dam and a town? Norris was a liberal Republican from Nebraska, and he supported the ideals of President Franklin Roosevelt. He was decidedly anti-big business, which also dovetailed with much of Roosevelt's New Deal. The creation of TVA was a direct result of Senator Norris's legislative action to prevent Henry Ford from leasing an unfinished federal dam and 2 nitrate plants on the Tennessee River in Alabama.
The federal government had started that project at Muscle Shoals to provide the country a reliable source of material used in making explosives. After World War I, the project languished, unfunded and uncompleted. Henry Ford promised, in his words, to build a second Detroit at Muscle Shoals if allowed to lease and operate both the dam and nitrate plants.
Norris didn't trust Ford or any plan presented by the private sector. Still, he wanted the dam and the nitrate plants operational. The problem was there wasn't enough water in the Tennessee River year-round to make everything work. Norris believed that if the federal government controlled the entire Tennessee River, then the flow could be made consistent enough to operate the dam and the nitrate plants.
Norris's determination, combined with Roosevelt's New Deal goals of government-operated social and jobs programs, helped to create the TVA Act that passed Congress. Jim Matheny begins our journey with a view of the people who would pay the dearest price for all of this to happen.
Between the apex of the Appalachians and the crest of the Cumberlands, a hardy group of mountaineers settled in these smaller but rugged ridges and valleys.
My people came into that area 1782. In that area, at least 98% of the people were farmers.
They lived like their grandparents and great-grandparents. Late 1700s through the 1800s. A lot of people made their own clothing.
They wove salvation into the fabric of life and prayed for their heavenly reward at dozens of small churches, most of them Baptist.
They walked long ways to go to church, walking through the woods at night to go to those churches.
And the journey of life did not venture far from home. Families lived on the same land from the cradle to the grave. People with names like Loy, which led to Loy's Town or Loyston, a crossroads and a center for mountain commerce.
The Loyston community. Now, I've been there. George Fox, there's a store.
It's just general stores. You could buy anything from a plow point, a boat, and food also.
Nobody had much money now.
The Great Depression suffocated the nation in the early 1930s. But hard living was already a way of life here. People made ends meet with whatever they could get from the ground.
And everybody had a big garden. They lived out of that garden.
And what they grew or made at home, they could trade at the general store to get all of the things they could not make themselves.
Sugar and salt and candy. We can take 1 egg to the store and get all us boys wanted for 1 egg.
And children in these hills filed into one-room schoolhouses for their formal education.
And we had 4 grades on one side and 4 grades on the other.
Most children went to school 5 or 6 years before ditching homework to focus on the hard work at home. And the comforts of home were relatively uncomfortable.
We didn't have electricity, nor indoor plumbing or running water.
We had lamps, oil lamps, kerosene lamps.
Less than 2% of the people had electricity. They were dirt poor. And even the dirt was poor. Through the centuries, this land was over-farmed, robbed of its fertility. And steep mountainsides funneled heavy rains into devastating floods and washed away the earth.
The area looked like the moon. I mean, during the winter, there was no vegetation hardly at all.
But most families did at least own the dirt where they lived. For generations, it was their land, their community, their happy home. And they loved it.
We were poor, but we didn't know it. Everybody else was, too. You don't fret about the things that you never had.
And everybody helped each other.
Everybody's good neighbors.
Life here was secluded. Only 23% of people even got a newspaper. They had no idea. Far away, men were planning a rising tide that would wash away their homes and their way of life forever. Michael Crow profiles the men placed in charge of that controversial project, the first men appointed to lead the brand new TVA.
A.E. Morgan, David Lilienthal, and Harcourt Morgan. If anyone could tame a powerful river, these were considered the men to do it.
So those three really determined the course that the agency would take. They were such big personalities and visionaries, really, that they certainly put TVA on a course that it is continued today.
Their appointments were in line with the principles on which TVA was formed. Arthur E. Morgan was a civil engineer by training and had designed the Miami Conservancy Project, controlling the Miami River in Ohio. He was handpicked by President Roosevelt to be the first chairman of the TVA. David Lilienthal was considered by many to be a force of nature in himself. He was an attorney specializing in utility law. Some called him assertive, even arrogant. And finally, Harcourt Morgan had no relation to Chairman Morgan and was the president of the University of Tennessee. He was known for his work in advancing the field of agriculture. The discoveries he and the TVA would pioneer with fertilizer would provide huge benefit alone to local farmers. But in the meantime, this trio had their work cut out for them.
For this part of the country faced multiple challenges. We had flooding every year. The Tennessee River was a non-navigable river, meaning you couldn't travel the entire length. We suffered from poor resource stewardship. Soil erosion was rampant. It was a hard life here in the Tennessee Valley.
The board met for the first time in 1933, and from the start, they encountered resistance. Many believed the government, by forming TVA, was forcing out private business. Political opponents fought tooth and nail against what they believed to be socialism. Lilienthal would spend years doggedly defending TVA practices and their very existence. And sometimes this group fought amongst themselves over ideological differences, and there were many between Lilienthal the fighter and Arthur Morgan, ever the idealist. But Roosevelt had a strategy in appointing A.E. Morgan. He was not only a civil engineer, but interested in social engineering as well. It's one of the reasons the town of Norris exists today, as Morgan tried to solve the problems of vice in similar construction camps, including drinking and prostitution. He was heavily influenced by utopian writings and wanted to change the lives of those living in the Tennessee Valley, not just with construction, but in one of the largest scale social experiments of the time. But for the people living in the valley that would soon be covered by rising water, this experiment would have very real consequences, as they were about to find out.
The job of creating public acceptance for the project fell to the new staff at the TVA offices in Knoxville. They were the point of contact between the giant governmental agency and the small yeoman farmer.
TVA needed Norris Dam to succeed in terms of public perception. A positive first impression could mean smooth sailing for a long list of future plans.
Over the mountain was something new, big, exciting.
Supporters of a New Deal would use a Norris success story as a powerful public relations tool. Portray TVA projects as an inspiration for children to climb out of the dark ages and reach new heights. The government even paid for off-Broadway productions with show tunes that touted the dam as something to sing about.
I'm working on a project they call a TVA. The government began it when I was but a child, but now they are in earnest and Tennessee's gone wild.
But TVA faced an uphill public relations battle with the toughest audience of all. The people who lived on the land they planned to drown. TVA had its message of greater good. They needed the right messengers, people who could go into the woods and deal with mountaineers face to face. And one of the faces they hired was Marshall Wilson of Knoxville. He was genuine. He knew how to talk to people. And Wilson was homegrown.
There was a definite prejudice against any foreigner who might come into the territory. I taught school in rural communities. I'm a native of East Tennessee.
Wilson's audio memoirs, scrapbooks, and photographs give us the greatest glimpse of the adventure ahead for him and TVA. When they would ask people to sacrifice their family's land, find new homes, dig up their ancestors' graves, and bury their beloved communities at the bottom of a lake. And try to have everybody be nice about it. As for Wilson, he believed.
I was so very much enthused with the idea of TVA developing this region. I had a very personal interest in it. TVA is trying to make a better life for people.
Resolving the people issues created by the dam's construction would take many years, but the need for the dam and its electrical power was immediate. The ordeal of the Mountaineers aside, the vast majority of people in East Tennessee wanted the dam and the promise of the cheap electricity it would bring with it.
When the TVA Act was signed on May 18, 1933, creating the agency, plans for Norris Dam were already in the works. Originally called the Cove Creek Dam, the Federal Bureau of Reclamation had begun surveys at the site.
So it started quite quickly. Folks looked at the design. Certainly architect Roland Vonk wanted something a little different.
Roland Vonk was a Hungarian immigrant and a modernist. The Bureau of Reclamation plans were simple, utilitarian. This was not what TVA and Vonk had in mind for their flagship project.
Because TVA was so progressive and we were changing the region, we wanted architecture that really reflected our message, what we were trying to do, how very unique and different we were.
And from that came the subtle curves of Norris, a design that won awards. But to get to that point, an enormous staff of highly skilled draftsmen worked round the clock, simultaneously designing sections of the dam and cranking out blueprints. But the work of these minds was nothing without the hands that would be building the monolith, and there would be many. October 1st, 1933, they broke ground. TVA at the time was receiving more than 1,000 job applications every day.
And Dad started to work on Norris Dam in 1934.
From men like Carl Steiner's father.
And a lot of these men went there to get a job because there was nothing left for them to do.
And there was no shortage of work to be done at the dam.
Well, it was a beehive of activity. Imagine, at our peak, we had about 2,750 employees.
There were welders, machinists, every sort of tradesman you can imagine, drawing a sharp contrast between the white-collar designers and the people who would actually build the dam. But many of those men had a complicated relationship with the hulk they were about to construct. Some of them were also in the process of being relocated from their land their families had inhabited for generations. But work like this was too good to pass up. For a good portion of them, subsistence farming was all they'd ever known. This was the first paycheck they'd received in their entire lives. While many living in the path of Norris might feel conflict, down in Knoxville, excitement was growing. The cheap electricity produced by Norris was the source of much enthusiasm, and the idea of the monolith of concrete rising from the ground was captivating. Not only the spectacle of it, but the change it would bring.
It's the first tangible symbol of what TVA was going to do for this region. Norris is a microcosm, really, of all that was yet to come.
Coming up, we will take a look deep inside the dam, but there was still a lot of work that had to be done before it would ever start producing electricity. And upstream, TVA was just as busy moving the families living there before their homes were covered by water.
Coming up, you'll go with our cameras into the depths of the dam, see sights rarely, if ever seen, except by the people who built it.
Today, the lake Norris Dam created is no doubt more widely known and appreciated than the dam itself. But even today, the accomplishment in building Norris Dam has to be recognized for the achievement it was and is. Michael Crow continues the story.
The story of Norris Dam is one of stone and the process of coaxing the dam from the earth around it. But before construction could get underway, TVA needed to solve two problems: how to get machinery to the secluded site and where to house the thousands of men who would work there.
We looked at a temporary construction camp, but as I mentioned earlier, Arthur Morgan didn't want to do that because of some of the illicit activities that take place at temporary camps, and so a permanent village was designed.
The town of Norris, as a planned community, was like nothing many had ever seen before. All greenery and quiet, winding roads.
Oh, it was like dying and going to heaven.
Cliff Stevens was 12 years old when his family moved to a farmhouse outside Norris. They still didn't have electricity, but it was head and shoulders above the coal miners' camp they left behind.
The standard of living was 1,000% improved.
But TVA also needed a way to bring men and materials in, so they constructed Norris Freeway. In just a few short years, those winding miles would bring cars full of tourists to see the dam. But now, it was all business. The dam would tower over the river, 300 feet across and 200 feet thick at the base. It would require more than 1 million cubic yards of concrete. Cliff's father labored alongside thousands of others, clearing the way for the foundation of the dam. It was backbreaking labor, but good money. But there, as they hit bedrock, they also encountered a problem. Norris is what's known as a gravity dam. That means the weight of the structure, in this case 2 million tons of concrete, is what holds the lake back. But the challenge there is keeping that water from eroding the sides and bottom over time and leaking around. At Norris, deep cracks in the rock threatened the stability of the structure, and caves riddled the bluff adjoining the west side of the dam. So they drilled hundreds of shafts into the rock and pumped in a milkshake-like mixture of concrete called grout,
which also stabilized those bluffs.
Eric Badisco-Mossink oversees Norris Dam. Walking through the facility, he is still amazed at what was accomplished with often little more than bare hands.
So if you look at the concrete, you can see that actually it shows the wood grain of the wood forms, and then also each individual nail that was sunken into the wood.
In the 80 years since it was built, some things have changed deep inside Norris. The generators originally produced 50 megawatts each. They've since been upgraded.
What we are between the two units, again, each unit, 65 megawatts apiece, 130 megawatts. We could provide power for 76,000 homes in a TVA service area.
But overall, structurally, Norris has withstood the test of time, down to the rivets and steel deep inside.
This door is the only thing between us and the lake, so that's pretty daunting.
Descending into the dam, you encounter the mechanical guts, access tunnels that stretch on, and the pistons that move the sluice gates.
Those are still original, so there is still a lot of original equipment. When they built this place, they really built it to last.
You also find the impossibly steep staircases inside, rising hundreds of feet and slick with water. The pumps punctuating that stairwell are uplift drains, relieving water pressure on the base of the dam.
I also like to call them speed bumps. In case you start falling, you can always grab one.
The running water is a sign of Norris's health, and also a reminder that the dam is alive in its own way, functioning like a man-made cave that breathes and exchanges moisture. Much like the caves in the bluffs that were here long before the dam. Some were not sealed during construction and can still be accessed.
These are original, where they probably reinforced the cave as they were opening it up.
But as we emerge from the dam coming out on the roadway, you'll find a constant reminder of the dam's history. The towering quarry just past the marina, which was used to make concrete.
That rock we're standing on it. You know, that rock was used to help build this dam.
TVA might say the quarry is an indicator of what made their work different, using the materials and resources already in East Tennessee to change the landscape forever.
And so that's, I think, one of the unique attributes of this dam, is that it was built so well. And they put so much effort and energy and thought into the construction of the dam.
Back in the 1930s, construction went around the clock, with crews harvesting rock from the quarry and bringing it up to the West Bluff. There, it was mixed into concrete and rowed down to the site on buckets suspended on wires. During a presidential visit, Eleanor Roosevelt took a daredevil's ride on one of those. And in just a few short years, she and FDR would hit the button that would lower the gates and bring the dam up and running, a day that many were anticipating.
As construction on the dam kept up its relentless pace, time was running out for the mountain people who lived along the Clinch and Powell rivers. The TVA staff just had to convince them of it. Jim Matheny relates the stories of first contact.
I was 5 years old. TVA came around and started talking about purchasing the land for this great dam that was going to be built.
How do you go into these isolated hills and tell a family of rugged mountaineers they'll have to pack up and leave? For TVA's Marshall Wilson, as politely as possible.
TVA made extensive plans to be nice to the people, to be courteous and this kind of thing. It wasn't a matter of coming in and saying you got 30 days to move out.
Wilson and his co-workers had a couple of years to meet and relocate more than 13,000 people before a lake would erase this landscape. He encountered incredible poverty. A family of 8 packed into a lopsided shack with no electricity, no running water, no toilet. And yet, these folks were happy. Why is that so? Whatever the family situation, come hell or, inevitably, high water, Marshall Wilson had to convince people to take the money, help them find a new home, and adjust to a new future.
And they didn't want to move, but they had to. Appraisers came and they said, this is what we're going to give you. Well, you didn't have any money to fight it.
See, here's the pictures of his house. They went around assessing people's property and how much they were going to give them for each thing.
U.S. Army 4-star General Carl Steiner of La Follette came from a colorful family that ran a country store in the flood zone.
He went by the General Sherman Steiner, but he was not really a general. He just gave himself that name. Yeah. Here is a picture of the old store, looking at these horse collars that's here.
When General Sherman Steiner moved, he rolled his general store out with him on logs.
Had to move it a mile away to keep it away from the water.
And he kept the store open the whole time.
But they never stopped selling out of it while it was moving. It was the only store over there that sold everything.
Wilson helped other families whose main concern was a suitable spot for their chosen profession.
We had a great many people who were in the moonshining and bootlegging business.
And if TVA wanted them to leave in good spirits, well then TVA would just have to move their stills with them.
We actually moved stills of people. We pretended not to know it, but we did.
They moved out moonshine stills, they moved out entire buildings. They even moved this. This old mill belonged to the Rice family, and they gave it to Marshall Wilson with the hope that he would be able to find somewhere to move it out of the flood zone and preserve a piece of history that goes all the way back to 1798. And that's exactly what he did with help from the CCC and the National Park Service. But these entertaining aspects aside, for the most part, Marshall Wilson's job was extremely difficult. He was the bearer of bad news, and the people he dealt with were heartbroken. Wilson faced an arduous task of finding thousands of people of very strong faith a future home. The living and the dead.
That was a big concern to the people. The graves of their ancestors would be forever covered with water.
The Campbell County Baptist Association condemned TVA, said graves were a church affair, not for the government to handle. So TVA gave people a choice. Take $40 to hire your own undertaker to relocate graves, or let TVA do it. At first, many took the money, terrified by the thought of strangers digging into their dead. But TVA quickly became the most popular choice when people saw they only hired local men of the same religion to relocate the graves.
These men were trained and taught to always be respectful, that although the government is moving these bodies, it is a sacred thing to the people.
And when families said goodbye to ancestors again, they could also choose to say hello.
And if you wanted to, they would take the lid off the casket and let you see.
Wilson said the remains they dug up could range from just a few bones and a belt buckle, all the way up to what Carlock Stooksbury's family experienced. When they viewed his grandfather's remains, they were shocked he had not decomposed.
His beard was still white, and he looked just like he did that I remember when he was living, you know.
TVA relocated graves wherever families wanted, as long as it was within a 50-mile radius.
Yeah, I've seen him dig the grave. It started, I guess, in 1934.
A piece of Bernie Hutchison's family farm became the New Loyston Cemetery. It's one of several sites where TVA relocated more than 5,000 graves.
I remember when the first one was put in there. Remember the name of Ben Blackman.
While some graves have headstones, many do not. This patch of New Loyston Cemetery may look vacant, but the field is actually full of unmarked graves. So is Big Barren Cemetery near Maynardville. Solemn places where grieving mothers relived the burden of burying infant children.
I think TVA, it could have been much worse if their attitude had been different.
The understanding and compassion of Wilson made a big difference for the families enduring this personal pain. All for a promise of progress that would eventually cover the landscape with new and powerful crosses that loom near their loved ones.
Coming up, you will see a recently discovered film that shows how the appreciation of both Norris Dam and TVA filled Knoxville's downtown.
And mountain families prepare to leave their homes for the last time. What some of them manage to take with them is completely unexpected.
From the time the first concrete was mixed for Norris Dam until the last bucket was poured was 1 month less than 2 years. It remains an impressive achievement 80 years later. Michael Crow takes us through the final days of preparing the dam for operation and East Tennessee's over-the-top reaction.
In 1935, more than a year before the dam would be completed, East Tennesseans were already celebrating. TVA Week reaches vociferous climax, shouted newspaper headlines, with reporters inside writing that Knoxville was fired with zeal for the thing. So full of zeal, they threw a ticker tape parade with various communities decorating floats to show their love for the TVA. It's easy to see why. To them, Norris was a sign of progress and promised cheap electricity. The Norris we know today came into being on March 4th, 1936, when the Roosevelts hit the button from Washington.
The reservoir had to fill, and then on July the 28th, 1936, we had the initial operations.
And with that, the turbines began to spin, sending power coursing down the lines. But several lawsuits from private companies kept that electricity out of Knoxville until 1939. For those in rural areas, it would be much longer.
No, we didn't get electricity until about 1952.
But the result was worth the wait.
I just remember, you know, we used to have to study our lessons and do our homework at night under kerosene. We call them coal oil lamps. When they finally got the line in, and I came in that night, and boy, there was just one light bulb hanging down on a socket, and it was the brightest thing that I'd seen in a long time.
Life changed quickly with easy access to power.
I would probably have not had or foreseen the opportunities that was going to be available for the future as a result of having that dam.
Taking families from a time when many struggled just to survive to a place where they could thrive.
Well, I never heard the word electricity, I don't believe, till TVA started it.
Among folks living in the mountains, it inspired such a sense of wonder.
And I remember turning that light off and on. It was a mystery to me how that light would come on to turn the switch and turn it off, watching it come on and off. They got on to me about turning it off and on. I'd wire the switch out.
But for many, the price of the power might be low, but the cost to other parts of their lives was very high.
As the lake behind Norris Dam was filling in the spring and summer of 1936, the families forced to leave their homes made their final plans. Most had found an agreeable place to relocate and start anew. The majority of them were resigned to the move. A few were not.
Still, it was an unprecedented undertaking. In a matter of days, entire communities would be underwater and essentially gone forever. Jim Matheny describes the final days.
The completion of Norris Dam brought a dark day for the people here with the deepest roots.
You know, after being in the place, a couple hundred years, that was a tremendous upheaval.
Even when staring at 265 feet of concrete evidence, some still doubted they'd really have to leave.
One old timer here got talking about the dam being so high. He said, well, they'll never fill it up. They couldn't conceive.
But for anyone who did not believe, a baptism was coming.
When the people realized that the lake was coming up, it broke up a lot of families.
Some salvaged raw materials from their old homes to help build the new ones. TVA tore down whatever was left behind and cleared and burned timber from the future lake bed. And even with scorched earth and water rising, Marshall Wilson was still trying to persuade the final holdouts to leave, and found the most effective appeal was loyalty to neighbors who now supported the project.
She said, I don't want anything except to stay right here. If it will make other people happy, if it's better for the others, I'm willing to go.
Out of around 3,000 families, only 5 had to be evicted by force.
We did not have time to work further with these people. The waters of the lake were rising. These people had to go.
And unlike all of the planning and thought that went into the long-term future of the town of Norris, once a Mountaineer was moved, as far as TVA was concerned, it was through with them. The people had to adjust to their new surroundings on their own. Some families were filled with so much rancor over this relocation. They truly chiseled their resentment in stone and took it to the grave, blasting TVA for confiscating the land left to an ancestor's grandchildren. Gone with the wind.
There was bitterness.
But many families found solace in something bigger than themselves.
Dad said, well, if there's one thing about it, it would have electricity, and they all agreed that it was going to help more people than it would hurt.
The displaced could buy new property, build new homes, and enjoy new comforts. What they lost forever was their community. And in the final days of dry land, before neighbors scattered all across East Tennessee, the people in Lewiston held one last roundup.
They just had a big get-together.
A farewell to friends, the fellow men and women forced to sacrifice for the greater good.
Knowing that would be the last time they'd probably get to see each other.
They just had to accept it.
The first chairman of the TVA board, A.E. Morgan, had a dream that the Norris Project, both the dam and the town, would long stand as a monument to planning and communal living.
Naturally, 80 years has changed a lot around here, but the one thing it hasn't changed is that East Tennesseans end up doing it their way. Michael Crow catches us up with all that is different about the dam, the lake, and the town.
The Norris Lake of the present is almost unrecognizable when you consider the starting point. A.E. Morgan imagined the hundreds of miles of shoreline as a place small businesses could thrive. But today, most people use the lake not for work, but for play. Fishermen float down the frigid tailwaters while speedboats churn the waves above. The town of Norris also did not turn out as planned. With the dam long completed, TVA sold the town in 1948 to a Philadelphia investment firm. Since then, a different kind of home is cropping up on Norris. High-end condos in gated communities. The people enjoying this real estate are a far cry from those that first settled it decades ago. But this pristine open water is likely closer to A.E. Morgan's vision of a utopia hidden in the hills of East Tennessee. And that beauty has its own draw.
I'd say it's very important.
Norris is what brought Matt Crumley's father home to Tennessee after World War II.
When they discharged him from Michigan, well, he drove with the family all night, and when he got to Shanghai Dock, he put my mother and the two kids in a cabin, and he went fishing without even getting any rest. So that shows how determined that he was to get to Norris Lake.
There, his love for the lake grew into one of the only lasting businesses, the custom boat maker Norris Craft. They pioneered stronger fiberglass bass boats, a huge step over leaky wooden craft, all bred from a passion for this place.
That's an adrenaline rush.
For decades, Norris has been the proving ground for their boats. The company would not exist without it.
I don't think it would, no. I don't think it would.
But those rising waters also wiped away many native creatures. Just as families' homes were covered, so were many natural habitats.
There were sacrifices made, yeah. The people made sacrifices that used to live here, and the fish and mussels that lived in the river made sacrifices.
Now, TVA biologists manage what lives in Norris closely, in a balancing act between generating power and the health of the lake. But that's what the story of Norris has always been. Compromise for the sake of something larger.
Everybody wanted a better life, and a better life for their kids and future generations. These people were sacrificing really for folks like me and you.
In a way, it's ironic that Norris, the product of years of vision and hard work, is now a much-needed escape, where people go to avoid the hectic pace of modern life.
All this push-button stuff, well, it becomes a part of you. You can't cook a meal without it. You can't take a bath without it. You can't get a drink of water without it. There you are. You're hooked. Curtis Steiner, farmer.
Curtis Steiner's words about getting too dependent on electricity ring true today, except now it's smartphones and high-speed internet. Steiner's opinion is from the book TVA and the Dispossessed, published in the 1980s.
2016 marks the 80th year since the waters began to rise. Jim Matheny travels the edges of the Norris Basin in search of any remnants of the old Mountaineer society.
Well, it's very peaceful.
Around 6 miles from Norris Dam, Beverly Leitner built her home on the same land where her parents and grandparents relocated from Lewiston.
My daddy was Carlock Stooksbury, and he passed away about 4 years ago. This was Lewiston, and that's my daddy's family moving away. They're moving here.
Memories of her father and his parents hold sway throughout the house.
It was my granddaddy Stooksbury's, and he rocked my daddy in it.
And when Beverly was growing up, her father and aunts reveled in the chance to reminisce about their dearly departed community.
All the time. And they were always homesick. You know, they just never got over it.
People displaced by Norris Dam endured a traumatic adjustment, thrust from olden times into the 20th century.
It was such a painful thing to so many of them.
But there was no adjustment for Beverly or other descendants. They never set foot in Lewiston. It was already at the bottom of a lake.
I can't imagine what it would have been like. I didn't live any of that. The difference in the lifestyle is tremendous. We had an indoor toilet when I was growing up, you know. We had a telephone and electricity here. You know, grew up thoroughly enjoying the dam and playing in the water, boating, swimming. I have one sister that lives on the lake. Every once in a while she gets in the boat and she said, well, let's go drive over Daddy's house, you know, where he grew up.
And although her relatives look back and romanticize their life before Norris Dam, Beverly was never truly convinced if given a choice, they would really return to the good old days.
Not one of them would have given up their telephone, their bathrooms, their, you know, electric appliances to move back.
While they left Lewiston in the past, signs of the old crossroads still live on today. The portion of the lake where the little hometown dwells underwater is now known as the Lewiston Sea.
I've got a bunch of scrapbooks. It's just what I have, just pictures.
And memories live on in family heirlooms, as well as the recordings of those who lived on both sides of the electrical age, like Carlock Stooksbury.
I just wonder what would have happened. Had Norris Dam not have been built, would I have been farming? Where would I have gone? Would I have got an education? I feel like it was for the best.
To some parts of the country, it might seem a bit odd to commemorate the anniversary of a dam. After all, 2 million tons of concrete can only have a certain amount of aesthetic appeal.
But Norris Dam is different. As practical and functional as it is, knowing the work and the workers that made it possible gives it deeper meaning.
Knowing the story of the people who uprooted their lives and moved away to make it all possible should remind every visitor of the humanity it represents.
I'm John Becker.
And I'm Robin Wilhoit. Thanks for watching.